The doctors said he'd forget everything. His name, his family, his past. But Colonel James Mitchell wasn't forgetting. He was remembering things that never appeared in his military files. Missions that officially never happened. Names of people who supposedly never existed. And with each memory that surfaced, his family realized they'd been living with a stranger for 40 years. Dr. Sarah Chen closed the patient file with a gentle snap. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the memory care facility, casting long shadows across her desk. At 45, she'd been treating Alzheimer's patients for over 15 years, and she'd learned to recognize the patterns. Stage 1, confusion about recent events. Stage 2, difficulty with familiar tasks. Stage 3, personality changes. Stage 4, complete memory loss. Colonel James Mitchell, 82 years old, should have been deep into Stage 3 by now. His family had brought him in 6 months ago, after he'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store he'd been visiting for 20 years. But James wasn't following the pattern. Instead of losing memories, he seemed to be gaining them. Dr. Chen. The voice belonged to Emma Mitchell, James's granddaughter. She stood in the doorway, her nurse's uniform still crisp, despite working a 12-hour shift. In her hand was a small digital recorder. "Emma, what can I do for you?" Emma stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "It's about my grandfather. I need you to listen to something." She placed the recorder on the desk and pressed play. Her grandfather's voice filled the room, clear and steady. November 15th, 1983. Operation Blackwater. 7 miles northeast of Managua. We lost contact with the extraction team at 03 for 7 hours. Dr. Chen frowned. "Emma, your grandfather's been talking about imaginary military operations for weeks. It's common with Alzheimer's patients too." "That's what I thought too," Emma interrupted, "until I looked it up." But here's what Emma had discovered that changed everything. 3 days earlier, unable to sleep after another confusing conversation with her grandfather, Emma had done something she'd never done before. She'd started fact-checking his stories. Operation Blackwater. November 15th, 1983. Nicaragua. The internet search results were sparse, but they existed. A declassified CIA document from 1995. A brief mention in a congressional hearing. Transcript from 1987. A footnote in a book about Central American conflicts. Operation Blackwater had been real, and according to the documents, it had gone exactly wrong in exactly the way her grandfather described. Emma had dug deeper. Every name he mentioned, every date, every location, she'd cross-referenced them all. Not only were they accurate, but many were details that hadn't been publicly released until years after the operations occurred. Her grandfather, who couldn't remember what he'd eaten for lunch, was recounting classified military operations with photographic precision. "Doctor," Emma said, fast-forwarding the recording, "listen to this part." The recorder crackled. The asset was compromised. Agent Rodriguez, codename Nightingale, had been feeding information to the Sandinistas for 3 months. We had to extract him before the Soviets figured out he was a double agent. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Emma, this sounds like something from a movie." "That's what I thought. So I called the Pentagon." The statement hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Chen blinked. "You called the Pentagon?" "I work at Walter Reed. I have contacts in military records. I asked them to verify just one detail. Agent Rodriguez, codename Nightingale, Nicaragua, 1983. Emma paused the recording and looked directly at Dr. Chen. "They told me that information was still classified, and they asked me how I knew about it. But the Pentagon call was just the beginning." 2 days after Emma's inquiry, her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. She almost didn't answer. No number. Late. Hour. But something made her pick up. "Ms. Mitchell. This is Agent David Park, CIA Office of Inspector General. I need to ask you some questions about your grandfather." Emma's blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your grandfather, Colonel James Mitchell, you made an inquiry about some classified information. I need to know where you got that information. Emma found herself pacing her small apartment. I got it from my grandfather. He has Alzheimer's, and he's been telling these stories. Ms. Mitchell, Agent Park interrupted, his voice carrying an edge. Your grandfather's military records show he served as a logistics officer in Vietnam. Supply chain management. Nothing classified. Nothing operational. Emma stopped pacing. But he knows details about operations that actually happened. That's exactly the problem. The line went quiet for a moment. When Agent Park spoke again, his tone was different, cautious. Ms. Mitchell, I need you to listen very carefully. There are 3 folders in the CIA archives that bear your grandfather's name. Files that were supposed to stay buried forever, but someone's been accessing them remotely. Someone who knows details only Colonel Mitchell would know. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that according to our records, the James Mitchell who participated in those operations died in Cambodia in 1978. But Agent Park's phone call raised more questions than it answered. The next morning, Emma called a family meeting. Her mother, Patricia Mitchell Williams, drove up from Virginia Beach. Her uncle Robert flew in from Denver. They gathered in the visiting room at Sunny Meadows Memory Care, where Colonel Mitchell sat quietly in his favorite armchair, staring out the window. Dad, Patricia said gently, we need to talk to you about some things you've been saying. James turned toward his daughter, and for a moment, his eyes cleared. The confusion that had clouded them for months seemed to lift, replaced by something sharper, something that looked almost like fear. What things? He asked. Emma pulled out the recorder. Grandpa, you've been talking about military operations, secret missions, things that ... things that might have actually happened. James's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. I shouldn't have. The medication makes me say things I'm not supposed to remember. Robert leaned forward. Dad, what do you mean you're not supposed to remember? For a long moment, James stared at his son. Then, with a clarity that stunned them all, he spoke. Because James Mitchell, the father you knew, the husband Patricia remembers that man never existed. The room went silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. The man who came home from Vietnam in 1975 was given James Mitchell's identity, his social security number, his entire life. The real James Mitchell died in Cambodia, just like the records say. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, what are you talking about? James looked at each of them in turn. I was never supposed to come home. I was supposed to die with my team in a village outside Phnom Penh, but I survived. And when I crawled out of that jungle 6 months later, I had information that could start a war between the United States and China. But the truth was more complex than any of them could have imagined. James, whose real name was Captain Michael Torres, had been part of a classified reconnaissance unit operating in Cambodia during the final days of the Vietnam War. Their mission was to document Chinese military advisors working with the Khmer Rouge. What they found was evidence of a massive Chinese operation to destabilize Southeast Asia weapons shipments, training camps, plans for a coordinated assault on Thailand and South Vietnam that would have drawn the United States into a direct confrontation with China. We were supposed to observe and report, James continued, his voice growing stronger as the memories surfaced. But our position was compromised. Local villagers, probably working for the Khmer Rouge, surrounded our camp one night. Emma watched, her grandfather's face transform as he spoke. The confusion was gone, replaced by the bearing of a professional soldier recounting a mission. 7 men went into that jungle. I was the only one who came out, and I came out with photographs, documents, radio intercepts, proof that China was planning to turn the entire region into a war zone. Patricia shook her head. But Dad, why? The fake identity? Why couldn't you just come home as yourself? Because Captain Michael Torres was supposed to be dead. His death was reported to his family. They buried an empty casket. They moved on, and the CIA needed it to stay that way. Robert's voice was shaky. So you became James Mitchell? The real. James Mitchell was a logistics officer who died of malaria in a field hospital 3 days before I was extracted. No family, no close friends. Perfect cover identity. I was given his dog tags, his service record, his social security number. For 47 years, I've been living his life. But the stolen identity was only part of the story, what James carried. Out of Cambodia had changed the course of history in ways his family could never imagine. The intelligence I recovered, James continued, it prevented a war. The photographs showed Chinese military advisors planning coordinated attacks across 3 countries. When the Pentagon showed those photos to Beijing through back channels, the Chinese quietly pulled their people out. Emma leaned forward. Grandpa, why are you remembering this now? Why, after all these years? James's expression grew sad, because the Alzheimer's is breaking down the mental barriers I spent 47 years building. The medication, the stress on my brain, it's like a dam breaking. All the memories I locked away are flooding back. He looked at his granddaughter, with eyes that suddenly seemed decades younger. I was trained to compartmentalize, Emma, to lock away memories that were too dangerous to carry, but the disease is opening all those locked doors. Dr. Chen, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. James, this could explain your unusual symptom progression, if you've been consciously suppressing memories for decades. The neurological changes from Alzheimer's might be releasing them. More than that, Doctor, James said. I think my brain is trying to tell these stories before it forgets how, but Agent Park hadn't given them the full truth about those CIA files. That evening, Emma's phone rang again. This time, she was ready. Ms. Mitchell, this is Agent Park again. I need to see your grandfather. Tonight. It's 9 p.m. He's asleep. This can't wait. We have a problem. 2 hours later, Agent Park sat in the memory care facility's conference room with James and his family. He was younger than Emma had expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too many secrets. Colonel Mitchell, Park began, or should I say, Captain Torres. James nodded calmly. I wondered when you'd figure it out. The problem isn't what you're remembering, Park said. The problem is who else is remembering it. He opened the laptop and turned it toward the family. On the screen was a surveillance photo of an Asian man in his 70s walking through an airport. General Li Wei, former Chinese intelligence. He arrived in Washington 3 days ago. We believe he's here because word has leaked that someone is talking about Operation Blackwater and the Cambodia documents. Emma felt the room temperature drop. What does that mean? It means, Park said quietly, that the intelligence your grandfather recovered 50 years ago is still sensitive, still dangerous, and there are people who would kill to keep it buried. But the Chinese weren't the only ones interested in James's memories. Over the next 3 days, Sunny Meadows Memory Care became the most secure facility in Virginia, unmarked. Cars appeared in the parking lot. Visitors were screened. Staff members were interviewed. Emma found herself escorted to and from work by federal agents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. This is insane, she told Agent Park during one of their daily check-ins. My grandfather has Alzheimer's. He can't even remember my birthday. Why is everyone so worried about what he's saying? Park's expression was grim, because he's not just remembering operations from 50 years ago. He's remembering names, locations, and methods that we're still using today. Emma stared at him. What do you mean? Your grandfather wasn't just a field operative, Emma. He was an architect. He helped design the intelligence networks we still use in Southeast Asia. The contacts, the safe houses, the communication protocols, they're all based on systems he helped create. Park pulled out a tablet and showed her a map of Southeast Asia, marked with red dots. Every one of these dots is an intelligence asset, whose life would be in danger if the wrong people learned what your grandfather knows. We're talking about hundreds of lives. Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. So what do? We document everything, Park said, before the disease takes it all away. But time was running out faster than anyone expected. Dr. Chen's latest brain scans showed that James's condition was accelerating. The flood of returning memories was actually speeding up the neurological damage. It's like a feedback loop, she explained to the family. The more he remembers, the more stress he puts on his brain. The more stress, the faster the disease progresses. Emma sat beside her grandfather's bed, watching him sleep. Even unconscious, his face showed strain. The man who had carried state secrets for half a century was literally dying from the weight of his own memories. "Grandpa," she whispered, "wake up. We need to finish the story." James's eyes opened slowly. For a moment, he looked confused, lost. Then recognition dawned. "Emma? How long was I out? Just a few hours?" "But Grandpa, we need to talk about Thailand." James's expression sharpened. "What about Thailand? You mentioned it yesterday. You said there were assets there, people who are still active." James struggled to sit up. "The Jade Network." "Oh God, Emma, if they compromised the Jade Network." His voice trailed off as Agent Park entered the room. "Colonel, we need those names. All of them." James nodded weakly. "Get me a recorder and a map. If I'm going to burn out my brain anyway, I might as well make it count." But James's final recordings would reveal secrets that changed everything. For the next 6 hours, James spoke into a digital recorder while Agent Park and 2 CIA historians documented every word. The stories that emerged painted a picture of Cold War intelligence operations that had never appeared in any textbook. "The Jade Network spanned 6 countries," James said, his voice growing weaker but his memory crystal clear. 13 primary assets, 47 secondary contacts. They've been feeding us intelligence on Chinese military movements for 30 years. Emma watched her grandfather's face as he spoke. With each name, each location, each operational detail, he seemed to age before her eyes. But there was also something else: relief. Station Chief Bangkok knows the primary contact codes, he continued. But if something happens to him, the backup protocols are in a safety deposit box at Bangkok International Bank, box 2847. The key is hidden behind the photograph of my unit in my bedroom. Patricia gasped. "Dad, you've had this key in our house for 40 years. I've had a lot of things in your house for 40 years. James smiled weakly. "The documents from Cambodia are there too. Microfilm, hidden in the frame of your wedding picture." Emma felt the pieces of her grandfather's life rearranging themselves in her mind. Every detail, every object in his house that she'd thought was meaningless, suddenly had significance. "The watch I gave you for your 16th birthday," James said to Emma. "It's not just a watch." The back panel opens. Inside is a micro-transmitter that broadcasts on a frequency monitored by the State Department. If you ever need help, real help, you activate it. But James's final revelation was the most personal of all. As dawn broke through the windows of the memory care facility, James called his family close. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About why I chose James Mitchell's identity." Emma leaned in. "What about it, Grandpa?" James Mitchell had a fiancée, Margaret Sullivan. She was a nurse at Walter Reed. When I took his identity, I looked her up. Patricia's eyes widened. "Mom, you're talking about Mom? Your mother was mourning a man she thought was dead. I was a man who was supposed to be dead. It seemed ... fitting." James's eyes filled with tears. "I fell in love with her while pretending to be someone else. But Emma, the love was real. The family we built was real, even if the name on the marriage certificate was a lie. Emma squeezed her grandfather's hand. She knew, didn't she? Grandma knew you weren't really James Mitchell. James nodded slowly. She figured it out about 10 years in. Said I talked in my sleep in Spanish sometimes, and James Mitchell's file said he only spoke English, but she never asked questions. She just loved me anyway. Agent Park cleared his throat softly. Colonel, we need to discuss protection for your family. No, James said firmly. They don't know anything operational. They're civilians. They stay civilians. But sir, Agent Park, James's voice carried the authority of a man who had commanded troops in combat. I've spent 50 years protecting secrets. I won't spend my last days putting my family in danger because of them. 6 weeks later. Colonel James Mitchell, the man who had lived 2 lives and kept a nation's secrets, died peacefully. In his sleep, his funeral was attended by more people than his family had expected. Men and women in dark suits who didn't introduce themselves. Foreign dignitaries who spoke in hushed tones. A general who personally folded the flag and presented it to Patricia. Agent Park approached Emma after the service. Your grandfather's testimony helped us secure 14 intelligence assets across 3 countries, he said quietly. Lives were saved because he chose to remember. Emma nodded, still processing everything that had happened. What about the Alzheimer's? Was he really sick? Or was it just the memories coming back? Both, Park replied. The disease was real, but in a strange way, it might have saved more lives than it took. If his brain hadn't started releasing those suppressed memories, we never would have known about the security breaches. 3 months later, Emma received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden box containing her grandmother's engagement ring and a note written in her grandfather's handwriting. Emma, this ring belonged to the real James Mitchell's fiancé. Your grandmother wore it for 50 years, never knowing its history. But love doesn't care about names or identities. It only cares about truth. Your grandmother loved 2 men, with the same face, the one she thought she was marrying, and the one she actually did marry. Both loves were real. Take care of each other. Remember that family isn't about blood or names. It's about showing up. Michael Torres, aka your grandpa. Emma slipped the ring onto her finger and smiled through her tears. Some secrets are kept to protect others. Some are kept to protect ourselves. But the most powerful secrets are the ones we finally find the courage to share. Because in the end, the memories that matter most aren't the classified ones or the dangerous ones. They're the ones that remind us who we love and who loves us back. Memory is fragile. Stories fade, but love endures even when we can't remember why it started. Have you ever learned something about a family member that completely changed how you saw them? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to True Stories Zone, where the most important stories are the ones families tell each other, and the most powerful secrets are the ones shared in love. Thank you for watching. Take care of your memories. Take care of each other.